I want to ask you a question. Just answer to yourself. Have you ever felt lonely? Have you ever felt all alone in life, like it wouldn't matter to anyone if you lived or died? Have you ever felt abandoned? I want to tell you a story about an 11-year-old boy who woke up one morning and felt that way and didn't want to live. It's my story. I was born in Union City, Michigan, a little town of about 2,000 people, 1,500. And my father was the town drunk, the town alcoholic. I hardly ever knew him sober until I was 20 years old. I'd go to high school and my friends would make jokes about my father downtown in the gutter making a fool of himself. They didn't think it bothered me, because I'm like some of you right here. You know, where you can laugh on the outside when you're hurting on the inside. Every time they told a joke about my dad, it hurt, but I never, ever let anyone know. That's a secret I carried with me all through junior high, high school. We lived on a farm. And I would go out to the barn, and I'd see my mother, who I loved very much, lying in the manure in the gutter behind the cows, where my father had yanked the air hose off the air pipes for the milking machines and beat her to a bloody pulp until she was so weak and bloody she couldn't stand up. And I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, and I remember just pounding on my dad and kicking him and screaming at him, "When I am strong enough, I'll kill you." We'd have friends over, and my father'd be drunk. Any of you, and there's a number of you that have or have had an alcoholic parent or a drug-related parent, then you know what I'm talking about. Trust me. If you don't have an alcoholic parent, you don't know what I'm talking about. You don't know the shame that every kid with an alcoholic parent carries with them every day of their life. Especially when friends come over and your dad or mom's drunk. That's when that shame just totally captivates your life. And so when friends would come over and my dad would be drunk, and just a little kid, I'd grab him around the neck and I would pull him out through the dirt or the snow to the barn, and I'd drag him into the pen where the cows would have their calves, and I would just drop him on the straw. Then you learn to drive young on the farm. As a little kid, you learn to drive. So I'd take the car and I'd back it out of the garage and park it up around behind the silo on the other side of the barn so it couldn't be seen. And then when the friends would come, we'd tell him he had to go away, just so we wouldn't be shamed. And in case he woke up before the friends left, I'd go back out to the barn. My dad was just probably only about 5'8", and a very slender man. And so I'd get down under him and I'd prop him up against the boards. Then I'd put his arms through the boards like this, and I'd tie a rope from one arm to the other arm. And then I'd go around behind him and I'd make a noose, and I'd put it around his neck and tighten it. And then I'd put it around his feet, and as much as I could as a little kid, I'd pull that rope until his head would go all the way over that top board. Then I'd wrap around his feet and knot it. And I'd leave him there at 7 o'clock at night until 6, 7 o'clock the next morning. And I often remember as a kid going out there and he would still be alive. I just wanted him dead. I just wanted him to quit hurting my mother. I just wanted him out of my life. 2 months before I graduated from high school, I came home from a date on a Saturday night about midnight, walked into the house, and I heard my mother through the entire house just profusely crying, weeping. "Mom, what's wrong? What's wrong?" And I ran into her bedroom. And she sat up in bed just crying, saying, "Your father has broken my heart." And then she reached out, put her arms around me, pulled me to her, and she said, "Son, I've lost the will to live. All I want to do is live until you graduate. Then I just want to die." Boy, that was hard to hear as a kid. You know the irony? 2 months later, 61 days later, I graduated from high school. And the next Friday, the 13th, my mother up and died. Don't tell me you can't die of a broken heart. My mother did. My father broke it. And I hated him. I despised him for it. When I was 11 years old, my oldest brother, Wilmot, sued my parents in a court of law for everything they had. Can you imagine a son suing his parents? no matter what the parents did. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know about the lawsuit, but I knew there was something wrong. Later, I found out that one of the things my brother got in the lawsuit settlement was a home my folks had built for workers on the farm that he and his wife lived in. And he announced he was going to move it. And later I found out my parents went to him and said, Wilmot, we need the house. We need it for workers. Leave it. We'll buy you land. We'll buy you a house. We'll give you the money, whatever. But my father had so wounded my brother. He said, no, I'm going to move it. Well, on that Saturday, when they announced that in 2 weeks they were going to move that house. Now, come on, I was 11 years old. My mind could not comprehend you're going to pick that house up and move it 1.5 miles down into Union City, Michigan. I thought, no way. It was like anticipating the first time you ever went to Disney World. And so for 2 weeks, it's all I could think about. And it came that Saturday morning, and I got up extra early and went out and did all my chores, went in, took a good shower to get the barn smell off, put on my best work clothes, slapped on some Old Spice, and I headed out the back of the house and went through the porch. And as you go through the porch, there's a sidewalk that goes around the back of the house. And as it comes around the corner of the house, you can look up the knoll and see where the house was that they were going to move. It was up a knoll probably twice as far as the length of this auditorium here. And as I went around the corner, I looked up there and I saw this small group of people. There were about 30 or 40 people from around Union City, Michigan. There were farmers. There were merchants of stores that I went into as a kid to get a hamburger, an ice cream cone, or school supplies. Parents of my friends, people's homes I stayed in. Well, at 11 years old, I thought, wow, this is going to be quite a party. I figured they couldn't believe you could move a house like that, so they came out to see it done. It didn't take me long to find out that's not why they were there. They were there because my brother knew that my parents would stand in opposition to moving the house that Saturday. So he was very popular, phenomenal personality. And he went around, got these farmers and merchants and can you imagine this now, parents of my friends, to come out that day to stand in opposition to my parents. Well, I didn't know that. So here I'm 11 years old and my adrenaline is flowing. And as fast as I could run, I was running up that knoll, and I got to the top of that knoll, and my world came crashing down. I heard these farmers, these merchants, parents of my friends, yell the dirtiest, filthiest language at my parents. And at 11 years old, I couldn't handle it. And I snapped. And to this day, it was like hitting a glass wall. The first thing I recall is I can remember, now I'm only 11 years old, and I'm running down the right side of that knoll just crying and screaming. That's probably about the most embarrassing thing that could happen to an 11-year-old guy. And I went to the end of the barn where we had a room about half the size of this up here. And there were 3 stalls, one for wheat, for oats, and for shelled corn that we used to mix cattle feed for the cows. And I ran up the 6 steps, turned around, and I pulled this huge door closed and put the big iron latch down and locked it. Then I reached over to the 2 windows and knocked out the 2 blinders until it was absolutely pitch black. And then at 11 years old, I went into that corn bin and I buried myself up to my neck. And that's when I prayed to die. I felt such shame. I was there for 3.5 hours, about 3 hours, until about 1 o'clock that afternoon. And my parents never came looking for me. You ever felt alone? You ever felt like it wouldn't matter to anyone if you lived or died? You ever felt abandoned? That's how I felt at 11 years old, buried in that corn. And that's when I became an angry man. I became angry at my father because I felt he abandoned me. I became angry at God, if God existed, because I felt God had abandoned me in that corn bin. Finally, I was so hungry and thirsty and chaff was in my eyes and my nose and my mouth that I dug myself out of that corn. And I went to the door and took off that heavy latch, and when I threw that big door open and that sunlight hit me in the eyes, it shocked me into reality. And at that moment, I started slamming the door on God. I damned God. I cursed God. I called God every name in the book, and I cursed my dad, and I damned my father. And for 7 years, I slammed that door.